Chapter 151, Throwing High. After they looked at each other for a few seconds, Xian looked away, feeling her rapid heartbeat. He wants to tell me a secret? What is he doing? Does he want to pursue me? Xian felt a little unutterably nervous and her eyes glittered. She knew that when a man shared his secrets with a woman, it meant that they had a close relationship in this man's mind. Soon after, Zhang Han said with a chuckle, "You will witness this place turning into a fairyland." Hearing what he said, Xian glanced at Zhang Han. When she was about to speak, a huge figure came running down from the top of the mountain all of a sudden. As Xian looked over, her eyes gradually widened. What? What is that? A chimpanzee? Why is it so big? Ah, it's coming. Xian subconsciously put her hands around Zhang Han's arm and leaned over him, pressing her bosoms against him. The touch did make Zhang Han's heart beat faster. But the next moment, Xian immediately released her hands. She quickly ran to the front of Meng Meng and looked at Dai, who was running towards them, with fear. "Oh, Mama, get out of Meng Meng's way, Dai is coming to pick me up." Meng Meng quickly ran away from Xian. Xian was surprised after witnessing what happened. Dai, what happened? When she was in a trance, Zhang Han came to her side, patted her on the back and said, "Don't worry, its name is Dai, it is the butler here and it is Hai's brother, as well as little Hai." Ah? Xian felt shocked, looking at the scene in front of her with a glassy stare. However, after seeing the giant chimpanzee playing with Meng Meng carefully, Xian let out a sigh of relief. Xian did not felt Zhang Han's hand stroking on her back until she calmed down, and immediately the places which had been touched got hot. She quickly took a step forward, rolled her eyes at Zhang Han and said with shyness, "Who is afraid? It's all your fault. You haven't told me in advance that there's a chimpanzee here, scoundrel. You didn't ask." Zhang Han was speechless. "Why don't you tell me though I don't ask you? I think you did it on purpose. You don't treat me as the hostess." As soon as Xian finished speaking, her face suddenly turned red, and she turned her head away from Zhang Han. Zhang Han was stunned a moment when he saw her shyness and his heart sped up. "Mama, come over here." Fortunately, when she felt a little shy, Meng Meng called her. Xian walked over to Meng Meng. Zhang Han chuckled, following her. It seemed that he and Xian, together with Meng Meng, became more and more like a family. "Mama, you haven't seen Dai yet. Big Hai, this is my most beautiful Mama, greet her." Meng Meng said seriously, looking up at Dai. "Oh?" Dai pouted, thinking about how to greet. A little while later, it scratched its head and wanted to reach out its hand to touch Xian's fist. However, catching sight of the grease on its own palm, it hastily withdrew hand and rubbed it against its hair. Then it offered its hand to Xian again. "What's it doing?" Xian stumbled briefly. "Oh, Mama, you're so stupid. Just use your hand to touch Dai's fist in this way." Both of Meng Meng's small fists bumped each other a few times. Xian understood. She stretched out her fist with a smile and touched Dai's enormous fist. Since Dai did not exert itself, its fist was quite soft. Even Xian stroked its hair on the arm and felt it was very smooth. "Ha ha ha." Dai grinned crookedly, hitting in its own chest several times with left hand. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." He was very happy. "Big Hai, you see my Mama this time. Is my Mama beautiful?" Meng Meng asked in a childish tone. Little Hai eventually seized an opportunity to show up. It nodded its head repeatedly, acting like a little fan. While Dai was taken aback at first. "Whoa?" It stared at Xian carefully for a moment, as if it was thinking seriously, and muttered. Although it boggled at the thought, it still shook its head, following its heart. It wondered, she's not beautiful and too skinny, and is not as charming as female gorillas. Xian and Meng Meng were astonished at the same time. Xian had not expected that. Dai shook its head. What did it mean? Didn't it think she was beautiful? Meng Meng pouted. put her hands on her hips and said indignantly, "Big Hi, what do you mean? Don't you think my mama is not beautiful? Why did you shake your head?" Whoa, whoa, whoa. The moment Dai heard what she said, it shook hands quickly, nodded and reached out its hand to give her a thumbs up sign. It's too late. Zhan rolled her eyes. She realized that Dai did not think so at all from the reluctance on its face. However, Dai's aesthetic appreciation was certainly different from people. It sounds fine. Meng Meng was satisfied when Dai nodded, so she directed, "Dai, throw high." "Oh," Dai replied and bent down, reaching out its hands to Meng Meng. However, the instant its palms reached the front of Meng Meng, she wriggled and ran back 2 steps. Meanwhile, she pouted and said discontentedly, "Oh, Dai, how stupid you are, throw Mama high, not Meng Meng." "Whoa?" Dai awkwardly scratched its head with its face creased up, and stretched out its hands to Zhan. As Zhan's eyes gradually widened, Dai picked her up all of a sudden and threw her up. The sense of weightlessness made Zhan a little scared and she screamed. Dai was bewildered. Why is the hostess screaming? The little host didn't even shriek. In the meantime, Dai did not stop but threw Zhan high in the air again and again. Meng Meng stood nearby, skipping and giggling. The little princess was really delighted because her mama was enjoying this game, while Zhang Han was looking at Zhan, who was being thrown up, with a chuckle. However, Zhang Han was suddenly stunned. Zhan was wearing a white dress and leaving her black long hair loose today, which made her look neat and fresh, but when she was thrown up by Dai, her dress was lifted by the wind. From Zhang Han's angle, he could just see a light pink unspeakable lace hidden inside. Zhang Han stood rigid and felt a little hot at this time, apparently. It had been a long time since he had sex. Okay, it's Meng Meng's turn. Dai, it's my turn, throw me high, cried Meng Meng, holding up her small arms. Whoa, Dai replied and finally put Zhan down. Zhan stepped on the grass, only to find her legs were so weak that she could hardly stand. However, Zhang Han stared at her all the time. When Zhan was about to fall on the lawn, a masculine body held her in his arms. Zhan let out a cry and looked up at Zhang Han, whose masculinity made her dizzy and even suffocated her. She dropped her head in panic, and a blush spread from her slender neck to her ears, finally suffusing her delicate cheeks. Only after taking a few deep breaths did she recover. She looked up at Zhang Han, who was smiling. "What are you laughing at? It's all your fault, let me go." Zhan stood up and pushed Zhang Han's arms away. She acted like a bashful young wife. "Why are you so scared?" Zhang Han said, helpless. Dai did not throw her very high and she could experience the feeling of free fall. Isn't it only a little exciting? Who's afraid? I'm just unprepared. Zhan was still stubborn, looking at Meng Meng, who was having fun, and saying gruffly, "Meng Meng is the reverse of my expectation. Ho, ho, ho." After playing for a few minutes, Meng Meng laughed and cried childishly, "That's enough, that's enough, it's time to put me down." Dai put Meng Meng down on hearing her words. At that time, Little Hai was already a little depressed, swinging its big tough back and forth. It thought, damn it, Dai is good at flattering. Mama, is it interesting to be thrown high? Meng Meng ran to the front of Zhan, lifted up her head and asked, "Yes." Zhan agreed with Meng Meng and the corner of her mouth quivered. "Do you want to play a little longer, Mama?" Meng Meng asked innocently. Zhan was suddenly stunned. She shook her head repeatedly and said, "We can't play this game all the time, we need to have a rest." Zhang Han could not help laughing. Never had he expected that Zhan also had her soft sweet side. "Well, okay." Meng Meng managed to comply with her and said, "So let's go and play with the puppies. Let's go, Big Hai Hai, let me sit on your shoulder, Little Hai Hai, just lead the way." Dai stooped down and wanted to pick Meng Meng up after hearing what she said, while Zhang Han and Xian were leading the way forward. After seeing this, Meng Meng avoided Dai's palms and ran to the front of Zhang Han, saying childishly, "Oh, Papa, Mama, it's wrong of you not to hold hands." While speaking, Meng Meng held Zhang Han's and Xian's hands respectively. She did not sit contentedly on Dai's shoulder until putting their hands together. The little princess glanced at Zhang Han and Xian, feeling very happy. That was right, only in this way were they like a loving couple. Holding Xian's hand, Zhang Han only found her skin was tender and smooth. He and Xian looked at each other, and he saw the shyness in Xian's eyes. They two walked forward first. When they reached the Thunder Yang tree, Dai and Little Hai passed them and quickly headed to the pet area. "Don't you let me go?" Xian blushed slightly. She gently pulled away her hand but failed, so she replied shyly, Chapter 152, Xian is moved. Well, Zhang Han smiled. When he released her hand, Zhang Han involuntarily needed it, which prompted Xian to roll her eyes at him. Xian did not know how charming she was at this point. She snorted softly and said in a disgruntled tone, "I'll go abroad in the afternoon. I don't think you have prepared any food to see me off." "Didn't we get here just now? I'll take the ingredients when I go back." Zhang Han was speechless. "But you've never made my favorite dishes. You aren't sincere at all." Xian pursed her lips slightly, which made her both sexy and lovely. "Look over there." Zhang Han pointed to the planting area and said, "I planted some vegetables over there a few days ago, including spinach, lettuce, cabbage, mushrooms and some other small vegetables." "Oh." Xian was shocked and lowered her head slightly. "You can have the hot pot when you come back from your business trip. The sheep over there are Ujimkin sheep, and they are also one of the best breeds for boiling hot pot." Zhang Han said casually. It took a long time to breed the livestock in Mount New Moon after being brought. Only in this way could they possess the best meat quality. Moreover, since Mount New Moon was not a treasured place, it needed time to improve the meat quality. After finishing the second transformation, however, the process would be shortened up to 1 or 2 days. Zhang Han knew hot pot pretty well. Hot pot, which derived its name from the sound of plop when food was put into boiling water, was called antique soup in ancient times. It was an original delicacy of our country with a long history and was a kind of food suitable for all ages. It was especially popular in East Asia and people could boil the ingredients whenever they wanted to eat. It was spicy, salty and fresh, oily but not greasy, and made people sweat ceaselessly. Typical ingredients to make hot pot contained various kinds of meat, seafood, vegetables, bean products, mushrooms, egg products and so on, which could be eaten after being cooked into boiled clear water or special stock. Sometimes these ingredients were served with seasonings. Xian preferred Chongqing hot pot, which was well known in China and was regarded as a culture. It could also be called cattle tripe hot pot or spicy hot pot, and its main ingredients included beef tripe, duck intestine, etc. Cattle tripe comprised black tripe and white tripe. It was cooked in a few seconds and tasted both chewy and tender. After hearing Zhang Han's words, Xian quivered slightly. When she raised her head after a long time, she was as cold as usual, but her eyes were overwhelmed with warmth and emotion. It turned out that he cared about me. Happy time really flew and it was noon soon. We should go back. Zhang Han took some ingredients, containing several potatoes, some cucumbers and tomatoes. Xian had eaten a tomato just now. She was indeed at ease about these kinds of green fruits and vegetables, since she raved about the sweet taste of the tomato. Even Meng Meng nibbled less than half of a tomato. While eating, Xian said casually, "I remember there's a kind of very small persimmon which is also delicious." Her words reminded Meng Meng, who waved her small hands and said, "That's right, the persimmon is red or yellow, Papa. Meng Meng also likes it very much." "All right, Papa will plant some for you and your mama in a few days, okay? Zhang Han answered with a smile. Great. Mwah, mwah, mwah. This was just a small episode in Mount New Moon. After returning to the restaurant at noon, Zhang Han made braised chicken, spicy and sour potato, cucumber with garlic sauce as well as tomato salad. Cucumber with garlic sauce was the most common dish in the restaurant. The cucumbers grown in Mount New Moon were extremely fresh and were very popular with people. However, it was braised chicken that surprised Liang Mengkai and other members. Everyone got some and was filled with joy. Ooh! This braised chicken is too fragrant. How can Xuanhuan native chickens be so fragrant? Great. Every time Pearson enjoyed food in the restaurant, he would sigh with emotion. What he did made people who were eating at the white table nearby miserable. They wanted to scold him. Zhang Han, Xian, Meng and Zif were also enjoying a generous lunch on the second floor. At the beginning of the meal, Zhang Han put a chicken wing in Meng's bowl first and Meng directly took it with her small palms to chew it up. In the middle of lunch, Zhang Han put another wing in Meng's bowl. Well, this chicken wing is for Mama. Meng directly grabbed the top of the wing and put it in Xian's bowl. Meng doesn't need to do that, it's enough for me to eat other meat, so dig in. Although Xian also liked chicken wings very much, she still put it in Meng's bowl. What she did was all because of love. No, Mama, you should eat one. Mama also should have a chicken wing. Meng grabbed the wing, placing it in Xian's bowl again. She was really firm. Okay, then I'll eat it. Xian smiled, feeling very gratified. Papa should have one, too. Meng stared at the plate with her big bright eyes, looking for a chicken wing for Papa. Here it is. Xian found that there was a chicken wing in the corner of the plate, so she picked it up with chopsticks and put it in Zhang Han's bowl. Meanwhile, she said, "You're tired, so just eat one." "I don't need." Zhang Han chuckled. When he was about to say something, Zif stared at Xian's and Zhang Han's faces several times and said exaggeratedly, "Wow, really? I'm still here. Why do I seem to be neglected by you? Have you displayed your affection to the point of ignoring everything? Gee, it seems that in the morning in Mount New Moon you..." Zif. Xian put the chicken wing in Zhang Han's bowl, stared at Zif and said, "If you don't want to eat, you'd better go downstairs." "Oh, are you driving me off? It seems that I'm not loved as a gooseberry." Zif was not afraid at all but quipped audaciously, "If you continue to talk nonsense, I will sew your mouth." Xian snorted softly, "Troublesome Auntie Fei, I'm going to sew your big mouth." Meng mumbled indistinctly because there was meat in her mouth. "Just eat." Zhang Han laughed. "My gosh, you three are ganging up against me. Woo, I stand alone. Why doesn't Lilai come? I must be bullied without a helper." Zif made a strange face. When she saw Xian putting down her chopsticks and being about to move, she quickly turned into a smiling face and said, "Just eat. The chicken cooked by brother-in-law is so delicious. Ha, ha." After finishing speaking, she started to eat alone. Zif, however, felt very happy finding that Xian and Zhang Han was getting closer and closer. If Zhang Han was a jerk who was sore-headed and negative as she heard before she returned home, Zif would be disgusted with him, but she did not expect that Zhang Han was so outstanding. Most importantly, he doted on Meng. All these made Zif feel that it was best for them to be together. Zhang Han did not eat the chicken wing in the bowl. He just put it into Meng's bowl when Meng finished eating her chicken wing. "No, Papa should eat." But Meng was immovable. Zhang Han helplessly took the chicken wing back and ate it. In fact, Zhang Han did not like chicken wings very much, but for Meng, chicken wings and drumsticks were the best parts of a chicken to eat. After lunch, Zhang Han drove Xian and Zif to the airport. When they were about to get out of the car, Meng cried in Xian's arms since she did not want Mama to leave her. Zhang Han was really worried for he failed to make her stop crying. Xian was also helpless. After coaxing for more than 10 minutes, she made Meng Meng stop crying. Finding the departure time coming, Xian and Zuf left reluctantly. Meng Meng was going to cry again. Meng Meng, stop crying, your mother will be back in a few days. Zhang Han said with a sigh. Whoop, how many days will Mama be away? Meng Meng doesn't want Mama to go. Meng Meng pouted and was about to cry again. Well, don't cry, Meng Meng. Meng Meng is the cutest. Stop crying and Papa will take you to the amusement park, okay? Zhang Han had the presence of mind to divert Meng Meng's attention. Meng Meng stopped crying as expected when he talked about the amusement park. She blinked her big eyes and whispered, "Are we going now?" "Yes, we'll go now, but Meng Meng can't cry. Wipe your tears." "Well, Meng Meng won't cry." Meng Meng reached out her hands and wiped her tears off. "Then Papa will take you to the amusement park. Do you want to sing a song to Papa?" Zhang Han continued to divert Meng Meng's attention. "Okay." Meng Meng's voice was still somewhat muffled, but under Zhang Han's regulation. Meng Meng sang a few songs, then the car rang with cheers and laughter again. They came to the ocean park again and Meng Meng wanted to take the skyscraping wheel once again. She found it fun looking down from such a high place. "Papa, it's so high. Ho, ho, ho." There were lots of little people on the ground. "Papa, big hi and little hi haven't been to the amusement park yet. Meng Meng wants to bring them." For Meng Meng, the two were her good friends. The amusement park was so interesting that Meng Meng certainly wanted to bring them here. Zhang Han did not hesitate to hear what she said. He touched Meng Meng's head with a smile and said, "Then Papa will bring you, Dai and little Haita here in a few days, okay? Great, Papa, it's very kind of you, mwah, 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 and we should come here with Mama. Well, I'll bring her too. Zhang Han and Meng Meng were having a good time in the amusement park, while in the frontier between China and Laos. Golden Triangle is ahead and we can reach General Will's territory within an hour, Ning Xuan said, looking at the mountains ahead. She seemed to be familiar with Golden Triangle. Chapter 153, A Breathtaking Moment. It seems that you are very familiar with Golden Triangle. Substitute of Leng Feng said in a low voice. As soon as he spoke, Zhao Feng and Zlong turned to Ning Xuan. Ha, ha, ha. Ning Xuan laughed and looked more relaxed than usual. It seemed that she had dropped her masquerade when she arrived in Golden Triangle. After giving a short laugh, Ning Xuan looked at Leng Feng and said, "Brother Leng Feng, let me tell you a secret. I've been here before. Ho, ho, ho." "Oh, haven't you?" Substitute of Leng Feng said slowly and then fell silent. No one was aware of his expression for they failed to see his face. It was a mercy that they could not see it, or they would catch sight of the tension in his eyes. He just listened to Leng Feng with headphones and repeated what he said. If he was not wearing a bulletproof vest, he would have been nervous enough to give himself away. "Brother Leng Feng, don't take my words to heart. I came here just to see poppies with others," Ning Xuan said with a chuckle. "Oh." Substitute of Leng Feng responded, compressing his lips. Seeing his facial expression, Ning Xuan narrowed her eyes and said laughingly, "Brother Leng Feng, you scarcely use "oh" to answer. Moreover, to my surprise, you wear not only thick clothes, but also 2 hats in such a hot place, and your tone doesn't sound like usual. Perhaps you're not Leng Feng." This remark made Zlong's and Zhao Feng's faces change. Substitute of Leng Feng shivered and leaned toward the window. Fortunately, Zhao Feng was between Ning Xuan and him, otherwise, he would be so scared that he had to betray himself. Ning Xuan's face sank seeing this scene. Her hand moved all of a sudden and pulled out a sharp dagger from her waist. A chilling light glinted on the dagger. Ning Xuan suddenly handed the dagger sideways to Leng Feng, but her wrist was caught by Zhao Feng. "Take it back." Zhao Feng stared at Ning Xuan with a frigid glance and said coldly. Ning Xuan caught a trace of cruelness in his eyes. She knew that if she did not take the dagger back, Zhao Feng was bound to stop her, so she frowned, saying in a disgruntled tone, "Don't you want to know whether he is Leng Feng? If not, what shall we do? Are we abandoned? Don't you care about your own safety?" She had some doubts when she disembarked because she knew that Leng Feng was not only a military counselor, he also possessed excellent physical quality. However, this Leng Feng staggered when he jumped from a half-meter high in front of her. She watched him all the way and found that there was something wrong. She had to determine Leng Feng's identity before they arrived in Golden Triangle. If he was Leng Feng, he had a password box with diamonds which were worth more than $20 million in his backpack. If he wasn't, then they would get into trouble. She had already sent the news to General Hu. The transaction object this time was General Will. There were a variety of forces in Golden Triangle and General Will was the leader of one of the powerful forces, while General Hu was his deadly enemy. "Don't stop me, Zhao Feng, I think he's the one with the problem. It's better for him to take off his hat and reassure us." Zlong, who was on Ning Xuan's right, said with a sneer. At that time, Zhao Feng did not stop them anymore but turned to substitute of Leng Feng. Eventually, under the gazes of these three people, substitute of Leng Feng slowly raised his head and moved the brim of his hat up to show his face. Seeing that he was Leng Feng, Ning Xuan felt relieved. She smiled and put the dagger away, saying, "Brother Leng Feng, don't blame me for being rude. It's too dangerous here and we're not as smart as Brother Leng Feng, so, since he's Brother Leng Feng, then we can be reassured." Zlong smiled. Substitute of Leng Feng did not answer but put his hat on again. He leaned against the seer, looking out of the window. 2 kilometers away from them, Leng Feng stared at the screen on the laptop. He picked up his cell phone, narrowing his eyes, and dialed. "General Will, this is Leng Feng." 15 minutes later, Zhao Feng's car drove into Golden Triangle. In front of them was a valley, and the mountains on both sides were covered in lush green vegetation, surrounded by the fresh air and elegant environment. Having stayed in the city for a long time, I think it's a nice place, which is like a paradise. Ning Xuan said with a smile, looking at the valley hundreds of meters ahead. "Ha ha." Zhao Feng laughed. Compared with Mount New Moon, it only had a little larger area, considering the surroundings, air and so on. Mount New Moon was the most beautiful place Zhao Feng had ever seen. Zhao Feng, however, was suddenly stunned after chuckling. He thought that something was wrong ahead. Perhaps it was too peaceful? The experience and intuition as a former special soldier reminded him that there appeared to be some crises ahead. When the motorcade drove into the valley and reached the center, Zhao Feng secretly put one hand on his waist, where attached his gun. In the meantime, Zhao Feng looked at both sides of the valley with great vigilance. Suddenly, his pupils contracted. Boom, boom. The bombs around the motorcade exploded with flames and smoke all of a sudden, hindering the motorcade from going forward. "It's an ambush. Enemies attack." There were more than 20 men in these cars and they took out guns in succession. When they were about to resist, a volley of shots struck. In addition to Zhao Feng's car at the center, the 4 cars ahead and behind were all raked. Some bullets hit the bodies of the cars, some broke the windows, and of course, some bullets hit the people inside the cars. Within 10 seconds, there were more than a dozen men shot. Other people either ran out of the cars or started the vehicles to drive forward. There was confusion at that time. Drive forward. Zhao Feng let out a cry to the driver who was already scared silly. He put in gear in confusion after hearing Zhao Feng's words. The instant he stepped on the accelerator, a clear and loud shot rang out from a distance. Pa, puff. The first breaking sound was caused by the main driver's window, and the second rumbling was owing to the driver being shot. A sniper. Zhao Feng's face changed. Just at that moment, he rushed to the main cab, opened the door and kicked the driver down. Then he quickly closed the door, started the car and drove forward. Meanwhile, he pushed down the driver's chair, hid himself behind the door and drove insanely onwards for 2 minutes. After the enemy's attack, there remained only 2 cars of the 5. What the fuck? Why were we attacked as soon as we entered Golden Triangle? Zhang stared and cried, feeling frightened. He thought he was out of danger, but just after he finished speaking, hum, with a loud noise, Zhang looked back and saw motocross chasing after them one after another from the jungle on both sides of the valley. Fuck. Be quick. Be quick. Zhang let out a cry. Don't yell. Zhao Feng raised his eyebrows and said, don't forget there is a sniper outside. You. Bang. Before he finished speaking, a rumbling came out, and the car was out of control. This shot hit the tire on the left rear side, which stopped the car. Zhang Feng spun the wheel sharply and the car rushed to the side mountain forest. Get out of the car. Parking the car by the mountain forest, Zhao Feng got out first. He opened the rear door and dragged substitute of Leng Feng out of the car. As this substitute was carrying a rucksack, he was slightly clumsy. Zhao Feng ran to the mountain forest, pulling substitute of Leng Feng. Besides Xuanhuan and Zhang, there were only 6 men left. The mountain forest area in front was a low elevation with sparse trees, which was small in size, so the motocross could easily catch up with them. They'll probably catch up after we cross this mountain. While running with substitute of Leng Feng, Zhao Feng paid attention to the surrounding environment. He puckered up his brows finding they were in this position. Shall we run separately? Zhang said loudly. He thought it was important to stay alive. What did money mean to him if he was dead? We'll die if we run separately. Zhao Feng sneered and said, don't concentrate on running. We should fight back and keep running after they approach us. The crowd rushed to the mountain. When they reached the top, those motocross were only a few hundred meters away from them. After shooting several times and succeeding in slowing the enemy down, they rushed to the mountain on the other side. When running out of the mountain forest, everyone's face changed. There was a stretch of plain, which was over 1,000 meters in length. It would take them more than 4 minutes to pass the whole area at full speed. It was estimated that those who drive motorcycles could catch up with them 4 times in these 4 minutes. What shall we do? Where to run? Fuck. Zhang was anxious and sweated. Run. Zhao Feng gave a cry and took the lead in running forward, so the crowd ran frantically. A minute later, more than 30 motorcycles on the backside reached the flat. They all twisted the hand-controlling valves jokingly, as if they did it on purpose or as if they regarded Zhao Feng and his companions as their possessions. More than 10 seconds later, the motorcycle team caught up. When they were less than 400 meters away, they all erected guns. Da. Most of the bullets hit the ground beside Zhao Feng and his companions, but a few passed them. Even 4 of his men were shot and fell to the ground. Xuanhuan's face changed seeing this scene. She gritted her teeth secretly and ran forward at an ever faster rate. When they were 200 meters from the front jungle, the motorcycle team was only 100 meters away from them. Perhaps they would be caught up after more than 10 seconds. What should they do? Their hearts gradually sank and turned cold. At the moment when they felt desperate, a louder roar came out of the jungle ahead. Boom, boom, boom. Dozens of cars drove out of the jungle, with a lot of people crying out. And the heavy machine guns. Get down. Zhao Feng's pupils contracted and he hastily held substitute of Leng Feng down, so did Zhang and Xuanhuan. Thump, thump, thump. With a relentless shot rang out. None of the people of the more than 30 motorcycles behind survived. Chapter 154, Tasty Food of World. Leng Feng, et al. Breathed a sigh of relief, but after they looked up, they stared at the motorcade ahead with vigilance, hoping that they would not go from the frying pan into the fire. Stand up. The driver of a Hummer in the middle of the convoy shouted. Leng Feng, et al. Stood up, only to find that apart from the 4, only 3 men survived at this moment. There were only 7 people left of the team with nearly 30 people, which also showed that Golden Triangle was indeed a place where people easily lost their lives. Which one is Leng Feng? 4 people got down from the Hummer, and one of them, a dark-skinned man, asked in his terrible Mandarin, "I am." Leng Feng's voice faltered a little. "Come with me, General Will is waiting for you." The dark-skinned man waved to them. Leng Feng and his 3 companions got into the Hummer, while the other 3 men got on the military car behind. A line of dozens of cars drove to the backside. "That bunch of people just now were General Hu's men. How did you leak out the information when you came?" said the dark-skinned man in a reproachful tone. "Maybe there were so many people." Ning Xuan answered in a muffled voice. "Ho." The dark-skinned man sneered and did not say any more. The motorcade drove for 20 minutes, crossing the mountain forest and coming to a deserted basin. After driving for another hour, they finally reached the territory of General Will. The territory was surrounded by patches of beautiful poppies and a few people were working in the flower field. Ahead of the region was an area with many principal residences and a lot of guards, surrounded by many watchtowers. This area was well protected. There stood a large mansion in the center. The dark-skinned man brought Zhao Feng and the others to the main residence. In the immense hall, there was a long table. Meanwhile, a foreigner in a military uniform, who had fair hair and blue eyes, was sitting at the head of the table. He was General Will of great eminence. "Sit down." General Will stretched out his hand to beckon them. After Zhao Feng and others were seated, General Will said directly, "Where are the diamonds?" Substitute of Leng Feng paused for a moment. After hearing the words from the real Leng Feng through headphones, he directly put the backpack on the table, took out the coffer and entered the code. There was a layer of glittering diamonds in the coffer. Substitute of Leng Feng stood up and slowly pushed the coffer to General Will. The diamonds emitted dazzling light, and people all knew they were worth more than $20 million. Even General Will narrowed his eyes with enjoyment. "Have a check." Substitute of Leng Feng said slowly, with a deep and toneless voice. General Will waved his hand to call a jewelry appraiser to verify them after hearing his words. A moment later, the appraiser nodded to General Will. General Will smiled and said, "Very good, great. I indeed want to withhold the goods for such a high transaction. In fact, even if I kill you, I can make others lay the blame on General Hu." Zhao Feng's and others' faces changed when they heard his remark. No one dared to doubt General Will's words in Golden Triangle. Since he spoke the idea out, it showed that he did have the idea in mind. Even the substitute quivered his body, getting flurried, but hearing the voice in the headphones, he tried to hold back panic and deliberately said in a low and slow voice, "I think a one-off deal is definitely not as profitable as a long-term deal, and General Will certainly knows that. Otherwise, you've already done it, haven't you? Furthermore, our Forever Harmony Association can take over this batch of goods, and later, we can take over more. What do you think?" General Will became solemn and burst out laughing. "Since you, Leng Feng, come in person, I certainly should show my due respect for you. Come on, display the goods." After he finished speaking, several of his men went out. A moment later, 200 kilograms of crystal meth were carried up. "Please." General Will reached his hand out to beckon them. Substitute of Leng Feng nodded to Zhao Feng and the other 2 people. The 3 took out 3 bags of goods respectively. After finishing checking, they all nodded and indicated that the goods were out of question. "In this case, we'll leave now, but considering our heavy casualties, can General Will send someone to give us a lift?" Substitute of Leng Feng said slowly, "No problem." General Will smiled and said to the dark-skinned man, "Send them out of the country." "Okay." Zhao Feng and other 6 people were escorted out of the country by 6 vehicles with heavy weapons, and all the way back to the ship. There was no accident. After boarding the ship, all of them felt relaxed. Substitute of Leng Feng asked them to put the goods in military packages prepared in advance, with a total of 4 big packages in front of them. If the ship could dock at Hong Kong safely and escaped being caught, the large-scale drug shipment would be successful. However, things could not be that simple, not to mention anti-narcotics police, Zhao Feng and Zlong, who were implicated in other forces, were also in trouble. On the other side, Zhang Han's restaurant. It was time for dinner. Several special guests came to the restaurant. Hello, audience friends. Welcome to Tasty Food of World. We come to New Moon Bay this time. Recently we heard that there's a restaurant called Meng's Casual Restaurant, which does a roaring trade and was very high in price. Therefore, this program will take you to this restaurant to find out the special food. A beautiful hostess with a ponytail was holding a microphone and describing the content of the program to a videographer. There were 5 of them all together, including 2 videographers. One was in charge of giving the hostess scenes and the other was in charge of finding a view, while the remaining 2 staff were responsible for the aftermath, such as holding the bag. The restaurant is just ahead. It's 6 o'clock in the afternoon and there were more than 20 people lining up in front of the restaurant. While speaking, they stepped towards the restaurant. As they approached, the hostess saw the sign in front of the door. There's a sign, let's go and have a look. Ah, the prices are really high. The egg fried rice costs 300 yuan per serving, a cup of milk costs 100 yuan, a bowl of noodle soup costs 300 yuan, the membership card, hiss. The first 10 membership cards cost 1 million yuan each. They all sold out. It costs 10 million yuan from the 11th. Oh, my god, it's too expensive. Only people with a membership card can enjoy the food here. Besides, people should pay extra money to eat. These are real imperative clauses. Phew, it's scary, and I don't know how the food tastes. Ordinary guests can only get egg fried rice and noodle soup. It's too little. Since there were so many people lining up over there, let's go and interview them first. Shocked by the sign, the hostess prepared to interview the people in line before entering the restaurant. So she went to the crowd and waved to a man in a suit who was playing with his mobile phone, saying with a smile, "Hello, sir, I'm the hostess of Tasty Food of World. Today we are going to do a program about this restaurant. Can I ask you some questions?" "Sure. May I ask how long it will take you to queue up here?" the hostess asked. "I came earlier today and it will be my turn in about 40 minutes. 40 minutes? What a long time." "Not at all." The man was used to this situation, so he said, "I usually have to wait for more than 1 hour. "What?" The hostess curled her lips and said, "Does the food in this restaurant taste so good that you are willing to wait for an hour?" "It's more than good. The food in this restaurant is the best I've ever had since I was born." "How exaggerated it is." The hostess's voice was a little suspicious. "Did I make an overstatement?" "Not at all. You'll know after tasting it." The man replied with a chuckle. At that time, the others around also said, "Only after tasting the food here can you realize what are the real egg fried rice and the real noodle soup. The food here is 100 times better than that of any 3-star restaurants or any 5-star hotels. What do you think of the prices of the food in this restaurant? Are they a bit high?" the hostess asked. "Exactly. The egg fried rice from other restaurants costs only about 20 yuan per serving, while this restaurant charges 300 yuan. But as a matter of fact, it deserves its fee." "Brother, you're wrong. In my view, I take it for granted even if it costs 3,000 yuan, because the boss is kind. He wants all of us to have egg fried rice and noodle soup. That's why it costs too much. I don't think it's expensive either. However, I don't have much money. Oh, I can only eat once in 2 days to improve my life." Their remarks stunned the hostess, who had not expected that they thought highly of this restaurant. After coming back to earth, the hostess said, smiling, "It seems that the food here tastes great. By the way, what happened to the members? Are the first 10 membership cards all sold though they're so expensive? Is it possible that the insiders bought these?" "Insiders?" The man frowned slightly and said unpleasantly, Don't judge this restaurant by your preconceived ideas with which you judged other restaurants. We witnessed the 10 members buying the cards. That's right. Another woman snorted and said, all the members here are wealthy. They did pay for the cards. Don't doubt anything. You'd better make comments after trying the food here first. Okay, I'm just guessing. Don't mind. The hostess looked a little embarrassed and stopped interviewing. She looked directly at the camera and said, then let's go in to interview the owner of this restaurant and try the dishes which enjoy immense praise. After finishing speaking, the hostess took the lead to the restaurant. As she reached the door, the people who was sitting in the front line raised his head and said, hey, what are you going to do? You have to queue up if you want to have a meal. The hostess froze and said, we'll interview the boss first, and we don't cut in line. I believe he will give me an extra serving to sample and evaluate. Extra delicacies. Ha, 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 just have a try. Dream on. From the crowd came a burst of laughter. Since they often came here, they did know the boss's temperament. She was crazy for hoping to taste extra food. Chapter 155, A Hostess Who Has Been Conquered. The decoration is quite ingenious. Family-style restaurant is not common, but it cannot serve many guests as a result. The hostess said as she walked to the kitchen, where Zhang Han was making egg fried rice and noodle soup. How are you, Mr. Zhang? The hostess greeted Zhang Han laughingly. Mum. Zhang Han turned his head, glanced at her and gave a slight nod. I'm YY, the hostess of Tasty Food of World. I heard that your restaurant is very popular and has received many good reviews. Could you give us a moment for an interview? The hostess said with a smile. Hearing the words, Zhang Han directly turned back to continue cooking, and spat out a few words to her consternation. I don't have time. Ah? The hostess and the staff were shocked. A moment later, she said with a somewhat stiff face, Sir, our program has a very high rating, and there are many benefits in doing an interview. I think you'd better. Indeed, the hostess was somewhat unhappy. Their program was at least an official cultural program, with high ratings both on TV and the internet. Everywhere they went, they were flattered by restaurant staff. However, the indifferent boss made her quite awkward. But before she finished her words, she was interrupted by Zhang Han with an insipid tone. I am not interested, Mr. Zhang. If you don't have time, you could give us a meal to take some photos and enjoy first. We will continue the interview when you are finished. What do you think? The hostess pressed down her dissatisfaction and added. But Zhang Han didn't even pay any attention this time. His cold posture made the hostess give a defiant look. When she was about to speak, Pearson on the other side waved his hand and said, Hey, please don't disturb Mr. Zhang's cooking. Come with me if you want to know about the food. You? What do you know? The hostess chuckled and said, Hey? It's so funny. What do I know? Do you know who I am? Pearson stood up and said, Who? I am Pearson, Michelin's food agent who is responsible for evaluating star restaurants. What do you think whether I know? Pearson said with a triumphant look on his face. Pearson was in a great mood when he saw their surprised eyes. A few days ago, he showed up in front of the boss and got depressed results. The boss didn't even give a shit about it, but in front of outsiders, his status carried a lot of weight. Seriously, you are a Michelin food agent? Could you verify your identity? The curious hostess hurried over and gesticulated the cameraman to videotape Pearson. Take a good look. Pearson smiled lightly, sat back in his chair, and casually took out his wallet from his pocket. He took out a work card and handed it to the hostess. True. The hostess's eyes widened a little and she was surprised. She didn't expect there was such a food critic in the crowd. She honestly handed back the work card. Just ask me if you want to know about the food here. Pearson waved his hand forthrightly. Well, please let me interview you. The hostess smiled. Wait. Pearson's face turned serious and said, I need to make a statement before the video. Ahem. First of all, This interview is only my personal opinions and suggestions. Secondly, for Michelin's justice, I will not rate this restaurant. I am just a loyal fan of this restaurant and happen to know food evaluation. All right, we believe Mr. Pearson's professional ethics and professionalism. Could you give an overall evaluation of this restaurant? The hostess began to ask questions. My evaluation is that the environment, specifications, and atmosphere of the restaurant don't meet Michelin star standards, but the food is here better than 3-star Michelin restaurants. That is to say that its food is better than all 3-star Michelin restaurants I have experienced. Of course, it is a pity that this restaurant does not offer drinks. Pearson said with a straight face. Oh? Your evaluation of the restaurant is very pertinent and gave a very high evaluation of its food. I wonder if you can specifically evaluate the specialties here? I'm sorry, but if you want to talk about specialties, then I can't give you the details. Pearson shook his head slightly, then smiled again and said, because every kind of food here is the most distinctive, even an ordinary cucumber or tomato can make people indulge in it. The hostess smiled. It was the first time that she met such an evaluation, and it was made by a Michelin food agent. This seemed incredible to her. However, after all, she was recording the program, so she adjusted her mood and smiled and said, could you comment on food like egg fried rice? Then I'll talk it over with you. Pearson cleared his voice and said, do you know why the food here is expensive? Not only because the food is delicious, but also because their ingredients are really high-end. Even if you thought it expensive before, then after my words, you will know that the food is actually very cheap. First of all, the rice here is Daohuaxiang No. 2, a brand new variety. I have especially taken some rice for identification. The result shows that a portion of white rice contains 70% of water, 30% of starch, 5% of protein and 0.3% of fat. This ratio is like the golden ratio. The rice here can be described as the king of rice. Meanwhile, other micronutrients in the rice are as much as 5 times higher than ordinary rice. You may not know what this means. Let me simply explain that the rice in this restaurant is the best in the world. There are no competitors. These words can be clearly broadcast. If anyone in the industry has a different opinion, please come and verify it. This, I.U. Pearson's words sounded so complicated that the hostess was puzzled for a moment and didn't know what to answer. She cleared her mind and asked, Sir, could you talk about the delicious food here? This is food evaluation. We don't need such a detailed analysis. Isn't this an evaluation? Pearson revealed a helpless expression and said, then let me put it more simply. The food ingredients here are the best I've ever seen. Only good ingredients can bring nutritious food. Do you understand? Putting aside nutrition, the food here tastes fragrant. To what extent is it fragrant? Take a portion of egg fried rice for example. The pure fragrance of rice, makes you intoxicated. You can't imagine the rich fragrance of eggs in it. A simple portion of egg fried rice. Pearson's long speech made the hostess and the staff drool and feel hungry. But eventually, they had to go out to line up. It was not until nearly 8 o'clock that they enjoyed a meal. It was useless to only listen. After eating it, they realized that the taste really made people feel like flying. After finishing the meal, the hostess had decided one thing. She would edit the program as perfectly as possible, so as to live up to such yummy food. After dinner, the restaurant restored to peace. Zhang Li and Liana, who came here to bum meals, volunteered to clean up the restaurant inside and out. When they were tidying up, Meng was clamoring for playing the piano. Of course, Zhang Han would not refuse, holding Meng to the piano. Papa, Meng wants to play it by myself this time. Meng can play that Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Meng said with a serious face, then pressed her small hand to the piano, and sang along in an immature voice, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. After singing it, Meng squeezed into Zhang Han's arms and said, Papa, I want to sing Let It Go. Then how about Papa playing the piano accompaniment for you? Zhang Han said with a chuckle. Sure. So Zhang Han started to play the piano accompaniment after the little princess was ready. Zhang Han had only heard this song before and had not listened to its piano accompaniment, but he had the rhyme in his mind, and as he had so many years of piano practice, so he produced an excellent and exquisite piano accompaniment. Of course, the most important thing was Meng Meng's singing. Although immature, it seemed to have a unique flavor and was extremely pleasant to hear. Let it go, can't hold it back anymore. Meng Meng seemed to have inherited Xian's stunning appearance and heavenly voice as well as her gentle character, which made Zhang Han repeatedly sigh. Only one ear was like me, seems a little less. However, Zhang Han also knew that if Meng Meng looked like himself, then that would be a little bit horrible for a girl. As Meng Meng's singing progressed, Liana, who heard it for the first time, gradually put down her dishcloth and looked at Meng Meng with stupefied eyes. After the song was finished, Anna took the lead to clap her hands in admiration. Meng Meng sings really well. Elder brother Zhang Han can play the piano. Wow, that's amazing. Elder brother Zhang Han, why are you so great? It's really... Ahem, Liana, enough, don't always say such flattering things. Zhang Li glared at her and said, this is not flattery, elder brother Zhang Han is great. Liana shook her head with shining eyes. Zhang Li was helpless, her confidant was such a boy crazy, how annoying. However, hearing the compliment, Meng Meng said in a lovely voice, my papa is very awesome. Yes, super awesome, oh, so handsome. Liana laughingly said, Meng Meng was shocked by Liana's expression. Her big shining eyes looked back and forth to see if Liana had a crush on Papa. However, Liana did not make any intimacy to Zhang Han or said things like I love you so much. This made the little princess feel safe, so she withdrew her eyes and hummed softly, my Papa is the most amazing. Ha ha. Zhang Li sniggered after seeing this. After cleaning up, Zhang Li quickly pulled Liana away and gave her another inevitable speech on the way home. At night, as Xian was absent, the little princess climbed onto the big bed, gathered into Zhang Han's arms, listened to Zhang Han's story, and fell asleep peacefully. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the sun had not yet showed up, and the horizon had just released a little light. A medium-sized yacht gradually reached the waters of Hong Kong near New Moon Bay. It was the ship of Zhao Feng and others who returned from the drug trafficking. Chapter 156, A Genius Escape Plan. There were not many people on board the boat. Zhao Feng, Ning Xuan, Zlong, and the substitute of Leng Feng were still in the same cabin. They had traveled all the way and were tired and exhausted, sitting in their chairs with their eyes closed. I'll go to the bathroom, Zlong said, got up and went out. Arriving at the bathroom, Zlong did not go to the toilet but washed his face with cold water. He raised his head, looking at himself through the mirror with a somewhat nervous way, and mumbled to the vague face in the mirror. After this case, you will enjoy all the splendor and wealth, leave Hong Kong and live and work in peace and contentment. After saying these words, he made a hideous look, took out a mini locator and pressed it down. Then he threw it in the trash can, turned around and left the bathroom. At the same time, Zhao Feng in the room also lowered his head. He took out a mini cell phone from his pocket unwittingly, entered a message on it and sent it out. However, in the humble cabin at the end, the real Leng Feng looked at the red flashing screen and leaked out a sneer at the corner of his mouth. All of them have taken actions, right? It seems that the show is going to begin. Leng Feng closed the laptop, stood up and looked at the 6 security guards and said, change your clothes. After saying that, including Leng Feng himself, all put on a set of diving equipment. After putting on the clothes, Leng Feng glanced at the time, waiting for about 5 minutes before spitting out a few words. Move. Among them, besides the 2 personal security guards beside Leng Feng, the other 4 were each holding a package. If looking closely, one would find these 4 packages were exactly the same as the packages containing 200 kilograms of ice products in Zhao Feng's room. They walked out of the cabin and quietly came to the stern. Each put on an oxygen mask, made a gesture of jumping down and then jumped into the sea one after another. At this time, the ship was already near the coast and they could see the scenery of the south of Hong Kong from a distance. Suddenly, more than a dozen speedboats came from the front. The personnel in the bow looked at them from a distance and found that the speedboats were equipped with alarm lights. They were startled and cried out quickly, "The Coast Guards are here!" Hearing this, all the crew members on board moved and ran outside the cabin shouting, "Coast Guards, there are Coast Guards!" "What?" Ning Xuan changed her expression and stood up immediately. "Coast Guards, what shall we do?" Zhang also got a fright, staring his eyes and said. Zhao Feng stood up too, his expression showed sternness but he said nothing. "Don't panic." The substitute of Leng Feng got up unhurriedly and said, "Take the parcels and follow me." The 3 gave him strange looks, took the 4 packages, walked out of the cabin and walked to the back of the ship. They came to the end of the boat. At one corner, there were 4 discus throwers, which had coiled ropes with hooks at the ends. The substitute of Leng Feng hung 4 hooks on the 4 packages respectively, and then said in a low voice, "Throw down the parcels and discuses." "Throw them down, are you sure?" Ning Xuan frowned slightly. "How can we find them if we throw them down?" Zhang sank his voice and asked. Although the sea water here was only about 30 meters, it was difficult to find them if they sank to the bottom of the sea. Even Zhao Feng looked at the substitute in an absent way and did not know his thoughts and intention. He. Facing the looks of the 3 people, the substitute of Leng Feng smiled softly and said, "There is some oxide in the packages. After you throw them down, the oxide inside will start to work and as the buoyancy rises, it will pull the ropes on the rollers and the packages will rise to the surface in about 2 hours." Hearing the substitute's words, the 3's eyes flickered. "Elder brother Leng Feng, it's such a good idea, let's throw them down." Ning Xuan laughed and took the lead in throwing her bag and discus into the sea. Zhao Feng and Zhang looked at each other and threw their parcels and discuses too. "I'll go take a look at the bow." Zhao Feng said the words and walked towards the bow with vigorous strides. After a few steps, he ran up. At the same time, he took out his mobile phone and entered the information editing page. When passing by the captain's cabin, he hurried in to look at the coordinates, input information, sent it, and then threw the mobile phone into the sea nearby. He took a deep breath, walked to the bow and saw a dozen more police boats approaching. "Zhao Feng, why are you running so fast?" A minute later, the substitute of Leng Feng, Ning Xuan, and Zhang came to the bow. Ning Xuan stared at Zhao Feng and said, "I'm here to check up." Zhao Feng's eyes narrowed slightly, looking at the police boats coming from the front, and his brow wrinkled up. He felt some doubt but said nothing. The police boats were somewhat suspicious. Were there any problems? Zhao Feng was alert in his mind. Soon, the yachts sailed near, and one of them gave out a cry. Stopped the ship for inspection. Then 2 police boats came up and a line of over 10 people boarded their boat. Seeing their police uniforms, Zhao Feng showed a stern look. He pulled Leng Feng a few steps back and stood at the edge of the hatch. Zhao Feng felt these people were very suspicious. If they weren't the Coast Guards, he could pull Leng Feng back to the cabin in the first place in case of a fight. However, he didn't notice that as people dressed in police uniforms boarded the ship, Leng Feng breathed out a long sigh of relief and his body relaxed totally. "Put your hands up." One long-faced man went up to the front with a pistol and shouted. The ship's staff honestly raised their hands. However, Ning Xuan and Zhang were also very smart. Seeing Zhao Feng's action, they also gathered together to the side. "Who is the leader?" cried the long face holding a gun. "I am." The substitute of Leng Feng suddenly opened his mouth. He stepped forward and said, "I am Leng Feng, the leader here." "Oh, so you are Leng Feng." The long-faced man pointed his gun at Leng Feng. Yes, I am. We are not far from the shore. Why don't you check when we arrive at the coast? I can even go to the police station with you to make a statement, Leng Feng said somewhat hurriedly. The substitute was originally captured by Tang Xun's subordinate. He was scared to death all the way and finally saw some hope when he saw the police. However, because Zhao Feng and others were behind him, he did not dare to say clearly, only expecting to be taken to the police station. However, he never expected that these people were not policemen at all. At this time, Zhao Feng stared at the man with a long face and suddenly remembered seeing him somewhere before. His heartbeat sped up and shouted. No, he works for Dong Tanping. Before Zhao Feng finished his words, the long-faced man sneered, looking at the substitute and said, no statement needed, it is enough to make sure that you are here. After saying this, he pulled the trigger. Bang! The substitute of Leng Feng was burst head along the gunshot. Zhao Feng's face changed greatly, he pulled out his gun instantly, fired several shots at the long-faced man and rushed to the stern. Ning Xuan and Zlong followed closely behind and exchanged fires with the Coast Guard several times. As the enemies were wearing bulletproof vests, they did not continue to fight, instead, they jumped into the sea. Over a dozen subordinates of the long-faced man ran to the side of the boat and fired at the sea several times. All right, forget about them, search the boat. The long-faced man said coldly. They ignored the sailing staff and began to search for one cabin after another. 10 minutes later. Not in this cabin. Not in this one neither. No findings. No findings? How is that possible? Search again more carefully. The long-faced man frowned and said, and then he stepped towards the substitute of Leng Feng and crouched down to take off his hat. After seeing his whole face, the long-faced man's frowning brows relaxed. This really is Leng Feng, the goods must be on board. The long-faced man walked back to the cabin and said loudly, give it a thorough search, find the goods even by digging to a depth of 3 feet. After another 10 minutes, his men came out of several cabins in turn and gave a unanimous answer, no, it is impossible, search again. The long-faced man said coldly. At this time, a rapid voice from outside the cabin spread. Elder brother, the police are coming. The long-faced man walked out at a brisk pace. His face changed when he saw a dozen real police boats and nearly 10 helicopters approaching fast. Shit! The long face gnashed his teeth, shouted angrily, and then cried, let's go. Along his shouts, they threw the alarm lights and some simple stickers of the yachts into the sea. Even the substitute of Leng Feng was thrown off without extra trouble. The long-faced man and others returned to their speedboats and drove forward unhurriedly. When the police boats arrived, the police controlled all boats to dock. All men including Zhao Feng, Ning Xuan, and Zlong as well as the floating corpse of the substitute, were all brought back to the police station. The officers on the police boats escorted them away, while the helicopters patrolled the area back and forth, waiting for the cargo to float up from the bottom. At the same time, a few kilometers away from the sparsely populated shore, the real Leng Feng with the real ice goods on a pickup truck, slowly headed for the headquarters of Forever Harmony Association of the Southern District. All the moves were in his expectation. He wanted to escape under the nose of several forces. Obviously, he had succeeded. FHA headquarters was a single building with more than 10 floors. It was called Forever Harmony Association. This was the largest night show and diversified entertainment venue in the Southern District. Ahu, Zhao Feng's immediate subordinate, was walking down from the 13th floor. He had just turned in the management fee collected from New Moon Bay this month. He would go to the 11th floor to find Guchen to inquire about the news of Zhao Feng. Guchen was also Tang Xun's subordinate who had a good relationship with Zhao Feng and who was fairly upright. Ahu respected him very much. Only when he passed the 12th floor, he saw 7 people rushing up the lower stairs. Ahu changed his look slightly after seeing the person in lead, and he quickly hid on the half between the 12th and 13th floor. Leng Feng, why was he here? Ahu hesitated a moment and followed them slowly when they entered the 12th floor. Arriving at Tang Zan's office, he found that the door was not closed and there was a gap, from which he vaguely heard some dialogue that struck him with amazement. "The goods are all here, not a bit less. Ha ha ha, good, good. There is nothing you Leng Feng can't finish. Good job. Lord Tang, it has been confirmed that Ning Xuan is under General Hu, Zlong belongs to Dong Tanping and Zhao Feng is an undercover. Well. Then keep Ning Xuan first, Zlong. Cut off his head and send it to Dong Tanping's house. As for Zhao Feng. Shot him to death. Oh, by the way, wipe out the small restaurant in New Moon Bay." Chapter 157, Disclosure. After hearing this, Ahu's face changed terribly and he touched the vase on one side unwittingly. Clap. The vase fell to the ground and broke apart. Oh, boy. Ahu widely opened his eyes with horror. "Who's that?" Leng Feng asked and gesticulated several men out to check. At that time, Ahu's body was stiff and numb. The stairs were 20 meters away from him, and it was too late to run there. Moreover, if the people inside found out him, he might lose his life. Ahu saw the people inside slowly pulling back the door. Seeing them about to come out, Ahu was nervous to suffocate. Just at this critical juncture, suddenly, a palm pressed on his back, pushing him towards the office door. Ahu turned back and found that it was Guchen he was looking for. "What are you doing here?" Leng Feng frowned slightly at the door and said, "I have something to report to Lord Tang." Guchen nodded and replied in a deep voice. His words made Ahu's nervousness slightly relieved. Entering the office, Guchen nodded to Tang Zan. Tang Zan looked at Ahu with a smile, which made the latter's heart beat violently. "Lord Tang, Ahu has just reported to me that Ning Xuan, Zlong, and Zhao Feng were arrested in the police station. Besides, there were some people from Dong Tanping, and..." Guchen looked at Leng Feng and said slowly, "A corpse suspected of being Leng Feng." "Oh, really?" Leng Feng smiled slightly, glanced at Ahu, and asked, "How did you get the news?" Ahu pressed down his nervousness and said, "One of my friends is a police officer. He knew I was following Zhao Feng, so he told me about it. As soon as I got the news, I called Brother Guchen and he brought me up." After saying this sentence, Ahu's face was a little anxious. He looked at Tang Zan and said, "Lord Tang, you have a lot of energy. Please help Brother Feng and others out." "Ha ha." Leng Feng smiled faintly and said, "They have just been arrested for less than an hour. The police must be busy searching. You have got the news so fast. Is it too strange? Can you give me a specific explanation? What's the name of your friend?" Ahu showed a nervous expression after hearing this. He felt some panic and was afraid that he would betray himself if Leng Feng asked a few more words. Fortunately, the composed Guchen was beside him. "Leng Feng." Guchen gave a glance and cried. Then he lit a cigarette and took a deep breath, spat out a cloud of smoke at Leng Feng. At the same time, he said coldly, "You are taking the lead in this operation. However, now Zhao Feng, Ning Xuan, and Zlong have been arrested and a person resembling you has died. Don't you think you have to give an explanation? Why are you here and they are caught? Huh? Explain it." Although Guchen had his boundaries, he was also an insider who was vicious. In Forever Harmony Association, he didn't give a damn to anyone but Tang Zan. A smoke column was floating in front of Leng Feng, making his eyebrows wrinkle slightly. Leng Feng hated the taste of cigarettes, so he took a step back, and didn't explain anything to Guchen. All right. Tang Zan was in a good mood and didn't want to make a fuss about it, so he clapped his hands and said, "Chen, you don't need to get irritated. All this is my command. The three of them will come out soon. I will hold a meeting later to explain their affairs." "All right, you two can go down first. I still have something to talk about with Leng Feng." "Well, then I'll wait for Lord Tang to hold a meeting." Guchen stared at Leng Feng, replied blandly and walked towards the outside with Ahu. When they approached the door, Guchen paused his steps and said without his head looking back, "Lord Tang, I think I should remind you that Zhao Feng and I have been fighting for you. I think Lord Tang should not be too partial." Then Chen and Hu went out. Ha ha ha. Tang Zan smiled helplessly and said, "Feng, sit down. Chen is always like this, don't take it seriously." "No, I won't." Leng Feng shook his head slightly and said, "A man like him who often loses his temper is relatively unsuspicious." Chen's face sank as he went out with Hu. Chen didn't say anything all the way to his office before he frowned and said, "What are you doing there? Don't you know Lord Tang's temper, elder brother Chen?" "I know, I just saw Leng Feng and went the due to fright." Hu explained with fear, and then he quickly said, "Elder brother Chen, I have heard something." "What is it?" "They said that the goods were returned safely, that Ning Xuan was General Hu's subordinate, and that Zlong was Dong Tanping's man. Lord Tang wanted to take his head and threw it at Dong Tanping's door, and they said." Hu's expression flashed a trace of hesitation and complexity. "Also said what? Does Zhao Feng also have a problem?" Chen asked with a deep frown. "They said elder brother Feng is." Hu's face became more and more bitter, and finally gnashed his teeth and said, "They said elder brother Feng is an undercover and would shoot him to death." "What?" Chen's face finally changed. He suddenly stood up with his eyes showing some absence. "He is an undercover? Are you sure? Seriously? Who said that?" Chen stared at Hu and asked in a deep voice. "Leng Feng did, and then Lord Tang said he would shoot elder brother Feng to death indiscriminately." Hu answered without reservation. This. Chen was momentarily agitated. He paced back and forth in the office, lit a cigarette and sucked it up deeply. After finishing a cigarette, he turned his eyes out of the window, threw the cigarette butt on the ground, and said slowly, "Tell Zhao Feng to escape and leave Hong Kong." "Okay, you can leave now." Hu nodded and went out with a complicated expression. Chen sighed softly. Zhao Feng was his best friend in Forever Harmony Association. Both of them appreciated each other because they had similar temper, character, and style in doing things. He still remembered when Zhao Feng first entered Forever Harmony Association. They had a fight in the challenge arena. Finally, they had a good fight. That was when the friendship began. However, hearing the news, Chen knew that he couldn't help Zhao Feng anymore. After all, no one could save an undercover. He could only pray that Zhao Feng would escape as soon as possible before Tang Zan made any action. Hu left the headquarters in a hurry and returned to the branch of New Moon Bay. As Zhao Feng's phone was still off, Hu asked over a dozen close subordinates to guard the police station in disguise and to call him when Zhao Feng came out. Hu did not dare to go by himself. He knew that since Tang Zan had given orders, he must have arranged men at the gate of the police station. It was useless for him to worry. He could only wait here. He didn't care about Zhao Feng's identity at all, even if he was undercover. What he cared about was the person, not the identity. During breakfast in Zhang Han's restaurant, the hostess and her colleagues who did the interview yesterday had come to line up early today. She was very enthusiastic at breakfast and told Zhang Han that the program was well edited and would be broadcasted in a few days. Zhang Han didn't care about fame and wealth, so he just nodded his head slightly. This time, the hostess and her colleagues didn't feel angry at Zhang Han's indifference. Instead, the hostess was very fond of Meng Meng, who was playing on the first floor. She repeatedly sighed that it was a pity they didn't record the little princess yesterday, otherwise it would certainly impress the audience. At the same time, the hostess kept muttering that after the program was broadcast in a few days, the restaurant would gain a round of popularity, because after all, the program had a real Michelin food agent's high evaluation. After breakfast, the restaurant was quiet again. However, on the other side, the police station was not quiet. Zhao Feng, Ning Xuan, Zlong, and several subordinates came out of the police station. After all, nothing was found. As victims, they had a guarantor, so they were released for free. However, Zhao Feng was showing a bitter face. because his boss just communicated with him in the interrogation room. The 4 bags of goods floating up from the sea were all got flour. The real goods must have been Tang Zan's hand. The boss gave him a new order to find out where the goods were. When he was in the meditation, 3 commercial vehicles with black automotive film parked in front of them, and several people got off from the back seat and greeted and invited the 3 into the 3 vehicles respectively. Then the vehicles left the police station in different directions. Inside Zhao Feng's car, there were other 4 people besides him. All were dressed in black suits and looked indifferent. Zhao Feng could not help feeling alert. "I'm going to call Lord Tang. Could anybody lend me your cell phone?" Zhao Feng said. "Oh, here." The man at the co-driver's seat took a phone out of his pocket and threw it directly to Zhao Feng in the back seat. Zhao Feng wrinkled his eyebrows slightly, picked up the phone and dialed Dahu's cell phone number. At the same time, he was watching the landscape along the road. Instead of heading for the headquarters, the car entered a desolate hutong, a type of narrow street or alley commonly associated with northern Chinese cities. "Something is wrong." Zhao Feng's heart sank but remained calm. When the phone was connected, he said, "Lord Tang." Ahu's heart beat fast on the other side, and as he heard Zhao Feng's words, he quickly said, "Elder brother Feng, Lord Tang has known your identity as an undercover. Run rapidly and leave Hong Kong. Besides, Lord Tang has also sent some persons to wipe out the restaurant. If possible, please run away with the boss." Zhao Feng's pupil shrank. Just then, the 2 men beside Zhao Feng reached out him with one hand and pulled out the gun from their waists. Zhao Feng's eyes became cruel with his arms hitting both sides with a blow. The 2 men knocked out directly with the heavy force. Before the co-driver man could make any moves, Zhao Feng leaned forward and punched him on the head with his left hand. Then Zhao Feng struck the driver on the neck with his elbow, moving to the left. At this moment, Zhao Feng had used all strength. It only took 2 seconds to knock the 4 out. After throwing them down, Zhao Feng stamped on the accelerator and rushed to Zhang Han's restaurant. "Please, be safe." Zhao Feng's eyes were very deep and his brow wrinkled, murmuring with a somewhat anxious tone. Chapter 158, 7 Attacks to Dredge Meridians. For Zhao Feng, this restaurant was the only place that had touched the softest spot in his heart in recent years. In fact, what attracted him at first was Zhang Han's mighty force. Zhao Feng remembered that the first time they met each other was when he went to a restaurant to collect protection fees. He felt deep pressure in the boss's cold eyes. Because of curiosity, Zhao Feng went to the restaurant again. After eating once, he fell in love with the taste here. The delicacies here conquered his stomach. Meng's smile, the strong father-daughter relationship between Zhang Han and Meng, and, of course, the heartening Ling Menkai, all attracted Zhao Feng, too. Gradually, the restaurant became more and more important in Zhao Feng's heart and became the place he wanted to guard. Now, when Zhao Feng heard that Tang Zan was going to ruin the restaurant, his first reaction was to pick up the boss and Meng before Tang Zan started. What about the task? The task was forgotten by him. His real identity had exposed, and he couldn't even go undercover, let alone did the task. Along the way, Zhao Feng didn't know how many red lights he had run through, and he even nearly hit other cars several times, but Zhao Feng didn't care. He drove to the restaurant crazily. The restaurant became close. Zhao Feng had reached the street where the restaurant located. The restaurant became more close to him. Zhao Feng could vaguely see the plaque of the restaurant. Finally, he arrived. Zhao Feng reached the restaurant door. He was relieved to see that nothing had happened in the restaurant. Then Zhao Feng slowed down his car and drove to the restaurant parking space. He was turning the corner, the side of the road. With the engine roared, a van crashed into Zhao Feng's car as fast as the wind. Bang! With a bombing noise, Zhao Feng's car rolled over several times and eventually collapsed in front of the restaurant door. This unexpected situation caused a few passers-by to scream. "Ah, there's an accident. Oh, my God, how did it happen?" hurry up, call the first aid. At this time, Zhao Feng in the car felt dizzy, and his ears were buzzing. He could even feel the blood slowly flow from his head. He pushed the door by hand and climbed out. For a while, he felt powerless. He stood up slowly and looked at the van, which the headstock was damaged, appearing a sad smile. Under his gaze, the van suddenly came across, and the door in the middle was opened. 3 men with headgear and rifles appeared. Da. A burst of random gunfire. Although Zhao Feng had already made the gesture of lying down, he still got several gunshots. Plop. He fell to the ground, squinting his eyes, feeling his body gradually cold. Am I finally free? The gunfire is continued, boss. Meng. Zhao Feng fell. But the shooting didn't stop. A shower of bullets broke all the glass of the restaurant. The furniture and the piano in the restaurant also got hit. The 3 men shot for 20 seconds before retreating into the car. Subsequently, the unlicensed van left the scene as fast as a gale. At this time, the people on the street had been stunned, feeling that their legs turned soft and almost collapsed to the ground. Someone was killed. The crowd was in a state of chaos. What about Zhang Han and Meng in the restaurant? Of course, they weren't injuries. When Zhao Feng's car was hit, on the 2nd floor of the restaurant, Zhang Han just had taken care of Meng's hair. The 2 beautiful ponytails on both sides of her head made Meng very cute. Papa, hurry up, we're going to play with Dai and Little Hai. Meng said in an impatient tone and ran to the stairs, but at the next moment, a muffled noise came from the restaurant door. Meng's clear eyes suddenly opened wide. She was shocked and said with some fear, Papa, what's that noise? Zhang Han stood beside her and listened, then his eyes stared sharply. He came to Meng immediately, picked up her and walked to the corner of the stairs. He smiled and said, it's the sound of firecrackers. Someone is going to set off firecrackers. Papa covers your ears. After that, Zhang Han covered Meng's ears with his palm, while using the spiritual force inside him on his hands to block the loud gunfire, so Meng could only hear some small sounds of bang bang, just as if there were someone was setting off firecrackers outside. Zhang Han sat on the stairs, hugging Meng's little body, and the little princess could not see the fragmented scene. Although the restaurant sprayed in a mess, she would not be afraid. Soon the gunfire stopped, and calm restored. Oh, Papa, there's no sound of firecrackers. You should take your hand away. Meng didn't know anything and smiled, clapping Zhang Han's hand with her little palm. Okay. Zhang Han smiled and took off his palm. Then he hesitated for a moment and asked, Meng, shall we play a game? Meng was stunned for 1 second, then her eyes lit up, and she said with a giggle, okay, what kind of game is it? Count numbers with your eyes blindfolded. Dad will blindfold Meng's eyes, and Meng counts numbers. Let's see how many numbers to count before we see Da Hai and Little Hai in Mount New Moon. Okay, deal. Meng was interested in what adults seemed to be boring. Seeing Meng nodding, Zhang Han pulled a piece of cloth directly from his clothes and tied it to her little head to block her eyes. Then Zhang Han said, well, you can start counting. Okay, then I'll start. Meng responded. Then she said in a childish tone and started to count. 1, 2, 3. Zhang Han smiled, holding Meng in his arms, and walked to the 1st floor of the restaurant. He didn't even look at the mess in the dining room and went straight to the door. Zhang Han was walking along, and his eyes gradually cooled down. It seemed that some people had courted death. Even though Zhang Han's strength had not reached the point of ignoring the law, the end of those people dared to do such a thing was to be killed by him. Just out of the door, Zhang Han saw Zhao Feng, who was already unconscious. Zhao Feng was still struggling. After seeing that Zhang Han and Meng were safe, his eyes trembled, and he was relieved. His lips squirmed, trying to say something but unable to say it, but looking at his mouth shape, Zhang Han knew the two words. Zhao Feng said, "Run away? Run away? Why did they have to run away?" Zhang Han's eyes fixed for a second. He squatted down and emptied his left hand to pick up Zhao Feng. Then he opened the back door of the car and threw Zhao Feng in. Zhang Han sat in the driver's seat with Meng Meng in his arms and drove to Mount New Moon. Meng Meng was still counting the numbers when she got on the car. 21, 22, 23. About 10 minutes later, Zhang Han arrived at Mount New Moon with Zhao Feng in his left hand and Meng Meng in his right. Little Hai smelled blood just as they arrived in the jungle. It came roaring with De Hai and saw Zhao Feng, who had been bleeding. They felt nervous that they thought Zhao Feng had beaten by Zhang Han, so they were a little scared, and they followed Zhang Han quietly and carefully. It was not until Zhang Han threw Zhao Feng's body under Thunder Yang Tree, pointed in the direction of the pet zone and walked past that De Hai and Little Hai understood and ran over. 665, alas, haven't we arrived yet? 666, Meng Meng doesn't want to continue. 667, Papa. Meng Meng is tired. 668, well, here we are, come on, Dad will take off the blindfold for you, Zhang Han said and took off the cloth strip that covered Meng Meng's eyes. Meng Meng shook her head and blinked her eyes a few times. When she saw De Hai and Little Hai in front of her, Meng Meng jumped with joy. Great, I can see Big Hai Hai and Little Hai Hai as soon as I open my eyes. That's funny. Well, Meng Meng wants to be thrown high. Meng Meng said and extended her small arms to De Hai. What? De Hai took a look at Zhang Han and did not know what was going on. De Hai thought it was the host who beat the Zhao Feng. It wondered if the master was unhappy. It thought, should I throw the little host or not? If I don't do well, am I going to get hit? I don't want to be beaten up. What should I do? Meng Meng, you're here to play with De Hai and Little Hai. Dad is going there to do something. Zhang Han gave De Hai a funny look and said to Meng Meng, okay. Meng Meng responded by jumping up with her arms outstretched to De Hai. She said, why don't you listen to me, Big Hai Hai? Hurry up, throw me high. Oh, De Hai's mouth turned up, and it knew it should play with its little master, so it put out its big palm, took Meng Meng in its arms, and threw Meng Meng up again and again, which roused a burst of laughter from Meng Meng. Seeing this scene, Zhang Han shook his head slightly and turned to Thunder Yang Tree. He came to Zhao Feng and squatted down to investigate his injuries. You were lucky to meet me, Zhang Han said and shook his head slightly. Zhao Feng was badly injured. If he were so severely injured elsewhere, he would surely die. But he was injured in front of the restaurant and wanted to alert Zhang Han to run away, which was enough to show his heart. In that case, Zhang Han was willing to spend some resources to save Zhao Feng. No, Zhang Han intended to not only to save him but also to make him as powerful as De Hai. However, Zhao Feng's situation was troublesome. Refine. Zhang Han's right hand was on Zhao Feng's chest, and his left hand was under the Thunder Yang Tree. The spiritual force operates and communicates with Thunder Yang Tree. It took 99% of the remaining liters of pure Yang water to refine the remaining jade fire dews. Thus the energy was then continually gathered into Zhang Han's body. The irascible spiritual force filled Zhang Han's meridians, which inevitably caused some swelling and pain in his meridians. But this pain was nothing to Zhang Han. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The next moment, he opened his eyes, which shone like diamonds. First attack. The Ghost Gate. Zhang Han's right palm left Zhao Feng's chest. He raised his index finger and pointed to an acupoint on Zhao Feng's chest. Bang! A muffled thunder-like noise loomed up from Zhao Feng's body, and a stream of energy began to diffuse in his body. Second attack. The Netherworld. Zhang Han's finger touched the lower side of Zhao Feng's neck. There was another muffling noise, and the energy continued to spread. Third attack. The Other Shore. Third attack. The Deep Dark. Fifth attack. The Vast. Sixth attack. The Empty. Seventh attack. The Heaven. dredge the meridians. He turned from using his fingers to his palms and slapped Zhao Feng's chest. Suddenly, those refined energies became violent in Zhao Feng's body. All the bullets gushed down the wound. 1 second, 2 seconds. Only 10 seconds later, Zhao Feng's wounds healed. At the same time, Zhang Han's spiritual force guided Zhao Feng's energy to rotate in his body. This method was called 7 attacks to dredge meridians. Chapter 159. Something was going to happen again. 7 attacks to dredge meridians. As its name implied, Zhang Han compressed the external energy and imported the power to Zhao Feng's body through attacking the 7 acupoints by fingers, to achieve the effect of dredging Zhao Feng's 8 extra meridians. Generally speaking, to dredge one's 8 extra meridians, Zhang Han should reach the foundation stage and have the energy of 3rd stage spirit treasure at least. But Zhang Han was an expert who had reached tribulation phase after all, and he knew a lot about cultivation. 7 attack to dredge meridian was a very delicate method, even in the legitimism cultivation world. This was a high-class method. This method could achieve the effect of dredging the meridians by using a few times less energy than the ordinary way. Once one's 8 extra meridians of human beings were dredging, he was qualified to cultivate. Because the amount of jade fire dew and pure yang water was not much, Zhao Feng would not have the spiritual force when he waked up. However, the strength and qualifications of his body had been improved a lot. There was another way to compare. Zhang Han once said that Zhao Feng was not necessarily Little Hai's opponent. Zhang Han meant that Zhao Feng didn't use weapons, and Little Hai didn't use its sharp teeth. They relied on the strength of theirs to fight. They might compete for a while, but Zhao Feng would fail in the end. Now, although Zhao Feng had made a radical change, he was not necessarily Little Hai's opponent under the above conditions. Because Zhang Han found that with the arrival of Dai and Little Hai fought when they were idle. Gradually Little Hai mastered some fighting skills. Little Hai was very fast, and it could find attack opportunities by continually wandering, so Little Hai had not suffered from Dai. This made Zhang Han look at Little Hai with new eyes. He didn't expect Little Hai to master these skills on its own. Little Hai was not an active fighter in peacetime, but his lethality would increase several times when he attacked at the enemy because its tusks were too sharp. When Little Hai absorbed energy, its body absorbed only half of it, and his teeth absorbed the other half. It seemed that shortly, its teeth would be the level of spirit treasure. Little Hai and Dai's abilities were limitless. Zhao Feng, who Zhang Han was going to accept as a disciple, was also so. Soon, the energy in Zhao Feng's body slowed down and began to nourish his body. Then Zhang Han moved his palm away from Zhao Feng's body, and no longer cared about him, stepped towards the pet area. Zhang Han took out his cell phone as he walked and dialed Zhang Li's phone. It was just over 9 o'clock in the morning, and Zhang Li was sleeping. She was still sleepy when she answered the phone. "Hello, brother, why do you call so early? You are annoying. I haven't waked up yet. The restaurant was attacked." "Oh, what attacked? What?" Zhang Li responded vaguely, and then she was shocked. She sat up and said with her eyes staring, "What are you talking? Was the restaurant attacked? What happened? Go and see." "You go there now. The restaurant is in a mess. Please replace all the glass and all the furniture. The bank card is in the drawer at the counter. The password is my birthday," Zhang Han answered. "Wait a minute, what's going on? Why was the restaurant attacked? Who did it?" Zhang Li asked quickly. "Don't ask these questions, do as I say," Zhang Han said and hung up. Hello, why did you hang up? Come on, you haven't make yourself clear." Zhang Li took a look at her cell phone, hummed softly, then she got up and dressed quickly, washing her face casually. She didn't intend to make up, so she wore a duck-tongue cap and hurried out to New Moon Bay with the white Maserati. At the same time, what happened in the restaurant was also known to all parties. Dong Tanping of the Western District was the first person who knew what happened, because 20 minutes ago, a bloody head was thrown in front of his house. After identifying it, Dong Tanping's men called him. At the time, Dong Tanping was having sex with two bright school beauty in his bedroom, but when he heard Zlong's head thrown at the door, he impotent. Dong Tanping got up and went out, looking angry and irritable. And then the report of the restaurant came next. Zhao Feng was killed, that restaurant ruined. Dong Tanping frowned and lit a cigarette with 2 deep breaths. As he exhaled the smoke, his face loomed in it. At the same time, he muttered softly, Tang Zhan is going to clean up his association. I'm afraid some people will be affected. He knew clearly that in the Forever Harmony Association, besides people along to Dong Tanping, there were people from Xia Shanhao and Yi Han, too. He also knew that there were undercover people in his force. This was normal. At this time, a man in his 40s beside Dong Tanping murmured, in addition to Zhao Feng's death, the restaurant was sprayed with gunfire but without casualties. According to the boss's stubborn temper, he will not stop until Tang Zhan is dead. The boss's strength can cause a lot of trouble. But if he is fighting with Tang Zhan head-on, it seems that he is unable to defeat Tang Zhan. Don't forget that Tang Zhan's securities are all recruited from Blackwater Security Company with a lot of money. That's true, Dong Tanping nodded and said. But Xia Shanhao will certainly help the boss of the restaurant. Yi Han will not stand by. We also hope to overthrow Tang Zhan. In this way, led by the boss and assisted by our 3 forces, the chances of defeating Tang Zhan are much higher. Even so, there is still a problem. The man next to him frowned slightly and said, as you can see from the last time Zhang Han wiped out the Chengxing nightclub, he was a formidable man. I'm afraid, with his temper, he'll go to attack Tang Zhan directly. It is urgent to contact him and discuss the details of the action. Okay, Dong Tanping nodded. You don't need to do this personally. I'll go to New Moon Bay to find him. All right. Similar scenes were shown on Xia Shanhao and Yi Han's sites. At this moment, it seemed that something was going to happen between the underground forces on Hong Kong South Island. Of course, it was not just the underground forces that were affected. At this time, at the Southern District Police Headquarters, when a police officer reported what happened in the restaurant, the director changed his face slightly and waved the officer out. Zhao Feng. Dead? The director's eyebrows frowned. In the whole police station, he was the only one who knew Zhao Feng's identity. He was not the direct supervisor for assigning tasks to Zhao Feng neither. At this time, hearing the news of Zhao Feng, his heart was a little confused. After several deep breaths, he took out his cell phone and dialed a phone call. Hello, Zhao Feng. He was dead. What did you say? A slightly rapid voice came from the phone. After leaving the police station today, he went to a restaurant in New Moon Bay where he used to go. In front of the restaurant door, he was shot by guns. The restaurant was also affected. But listen to the crowd's instructions. Zhao Feng was taken away by the boss of the restaurant. The director answered slowly. Who did it? It's still under investigation. Tang Zhan is the top suspect. But they didn't have evidence. The director didn't say the word. Presumably, the other side knew what he meant. Tang Zhan could not be caught without evidence. I don't care what method you use. In a month, Tang Zhan must be brought to justice. The other party said a word and hung up the phone directly, leaving the director with a bitter face. Tang Zhan was very cunning. He always did things watertight, which made the police headache. As for Tang Zhan, everyone knew him well, but there was no evidence, and there was nothing they could do about him. The director knew that Tang Zhan had a good relationship with several police chiefs and some higher-ups. Arresting him without any evidence was just delusional. Right now, even Zhao Feng's clues were broken. Such excellent police failed. Who else could they send over? Zhao Feng had been latent for nearly 3 years, but he came to such end. The director's mood was also very depressed, full of sadness. Meanwhile, Tang Zhan, Leng Feng and 2 other military divisions were in Tang Zhan's mansion. Tang Zhan's face became happier and happier as he listened to the reports. Today, Tang Zhan was targeting not only Zhao Feng and Zlong, but also a dozen people who had been identified but had not been removed. Today, he chose to round up all enemies in one fell swoop. He wouldn't do it unless he was sure he could do it as world-shaking. This was Tang Zan's style. At the other end, Zhang Li drove to New Moon Bay's restaurant. Safety lines had been pulled up, and several police officers were taking pictures inside and outside the restaurant. This is the scene of the case. It's working now. No idle people are allowed to enter. Seeing Zhang Li coming, the captain said and stood in front of her. Why couldn't I? This is my brother's restaurant. Why can't I enter? Zhang Li said and crossed the safety line with a flick of her eyebrow. Yeah, that's good. Call your brother back. We need to ask some information from him, the captain said heavily. I'll call and ask. Zhang Li was shocked to see the restaurant. After hearing the words, she quickly took out her cell phone and dialed Zhang Han's phone. Hello, brother, where are you? What happened to the restaurant? How did that happen? What? Oh, well, I see. Okay. Zhang Li hung up. She looked at the captain and said, my brother can't come back. Now I'm looking for someone to clean the restaurant. If you're over, you can go now. What? The captain frowned and said, get out of here and don't hinder us from exercising our official duties. Also, if you are the sister of the restaurant owner, let him come over quickly. Better not let us catch him. Catch him? Zhang Li stared and shouted, did my brother commit a crime? Do you have an arrest warrant? This is my brother's private restaurant. Does he allow you to enter? Are you responsible for the loss? Madam, the captain suppressed his anger and said in a bad voice, there has just been shooting here. You'd better not make unreasonable noise here, or we have the right to arrest you, and you can't prove that you are related to this restaurant for the time being. I advise you to go back to where you came from. Who do you say is making trouble for no reason? Zhang Li got angry and pointed to the captain and said, I'm looking for someone to clean up the restaurant now. This is the private sector. Have you finished taking pictures yet? Will you please leave? The captain looked severe and said coldly, come on, take her back to the police station. I suspect she has something to do with the suspect. Interrogate her. He was the one who handled the case here. He didn't need a woman to tell him what to do. But just as his men were about to catch Zhang Li, an insult came from a distance. Bullshit. Chapter 160, Kill Tang Zan for me. The captain's eyes were cold, and he turned to see a man in his 50s, who looked familiar, coming over calmly. Who was the fuck this? The captain was puzzled. But he felt familiar, so he didn't speak at first. But Wang Qiang was angry and wore a heavy look. He had stood by and watched for a while. At first, he was shocked when he saw the condition of the restaurant and the blood stains at the door. He called his former subordinates to find out the details. Despite Zhao Feng's situation, the restaurant was also the victim from any point of view. Fortunately, Wang Qiang was relieved that the restaurant owner and Meng were not injured. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Zhang Li driving over. Of course, he knew the restaurant owner's sister. Then he saw the scene what had happened, and suddenly strange anger welled up in his mind. He walked quickly to the captain, frowned slightly, and with a distinct superior gesture, murmured, have you finished taking pictures for 10 minutes? What are you doing here? Why don't you use this time to find the killer? You're not only show off in here, delaying cleaning up of the restaurant, but also want to catch her. How dare you think you're reasonable? Who are you? The captain felt pressure and felt that the man in front of him was remarkable, but when he felt the people around him pointing to him, he set his mind and asked, old man, I don't care who you are, please don't interfere with our business. It's not your turn to tell us what we should do. Irrational. Wang Qiang stared and said, okay, I can't tell you, someone can. Tell me who's your superior. During the conversation, Wang Qiang took out his mobile phone. The captain was a young hothead man. He saw Wang Qiang's movements and said, you have no right to know who my supervisor is. I follow the rules. Do you have any questions? Well, since you want to know, I'll tell you, My supervisor's name is Bai Ziwin. At the same time, the captain sneered in his heart. He wasn't a coward. How could he be threatened by a phone call and a few words? Wang Qiang had no impression of the name Bai Ziwin, so he called the director of the Southern District Police Headquarters directly. This is Wang Qiang. There's one thing I have to tell you, here in the Meng Meng restaurant. The captain was stunned when he heard Wang Qiang. He thought the name was very familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. But the two men behind him changed their faces when they heard the name. They looked at Wang Qiang like looking at a horrible monster. Neither of them was loyal. They coughed softly and then turned around and slipped away. Take it. In the captain's thoughtful eyes, Wang Qiang handed him the mobile phone. The captain took it and said, "Hello, this is Fan Yongbo, a captain of New Moon Bay Police Station. You are ahem. The director, I. Ah, I really, I." The captain was frightened and dumb for a moment. He couldn't even make himself understood. In the director's criticism, he finally remembered the identity of the old man in front of him. Oh my God, why am I so unlucky? The captain thought with his heart sank. In less than a minute, he broke out in a cold sweat. After hanging up, he slowly and carefully handed the mobile phone to Wang Qiang with a wailing expression and said flatteringly, "Well, Director Wang, I didn't think that it was you. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I did that because I'm worried about this case. Who should you apologize to?" Wang Qiang took the phone and said lightly, "Yes, there. Madam, I'm sorry, I just lost my temper, I'm sorry." The captain quickly apologized to Zhang Li. Zhang Li was not unreasonable either. Seeing the captain apologize, she rolled her eyes, and then she changed her expression. She looked at Wang Qiang with a smile and said, "Uncle Wang, thank you. Why are you here? I just passed by. I didn't expect such a thing to happen. The restaurant was affected, which is also the responsibility of the police," Wang Qiang said and shook his head slightly, sighed softly. "Yes, it's our fault. We must make corrections next time and increase the number of patrols," the captain said and nodded. He could not tell the bitterness in his heart. No one could anticipate such things. Zhang Li gave the captain a dirty look and said, "Come on, don't flatter me here. You are not to blame for the sudden accident. If you finished, you can go now. I'm going to have the restaurant cleaned up." "Well, then, let's help you clean up." The captain turned his eyes, called his men, went into the restaurant, picked up the broom mop and began to clean up. Wang Qiang looked at them and shook his head helplessly. They couldn't catch the bandits, but they could flatter people very well. But he also knew that it was hard to fight against evil forces. "I'll go back if nothing happens. It seems that I can't come to have a meal here this noon," Wang Qiang said and turned away. Zhang Li went into the restaurant, took out Zhang Han's bank card, made several phone calls and began to shop. Time turned to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In the Mount New Moon, Zhao Feng's eyelashes quivered, and he slowly opened his eyes. What he saw was a tall tree and a blue sky, with a few thin clouds floating on the sky. Such a beautiful scene. "Am I in heaven?" Zhao Feng murmured. It seems possible to describe Mount New Moon as a paradise on earth. Suddenly, a familiar voice came. Boss?" Zhao Feng was stunned and fixed his eyes on him. He saw Zhang Han sitting on a trunk a dozen meters high and looking down at himself. "What?" Zhao Feng was confused and did not know what had happened. He clearly remembered that he was hit by a lot of bullets. Could he survive with so many injuries? Or, in his dull eyes, the boss jumped slightly and jumped down directly, a dozen meters, equivalent to the height of 4 or 5 stories. He watched his boss jump down and fall lightly on the ground. "Boss, are you also?" Zhao Feng said hesitantly about the puzzling scene that had happened in front of him. He was wondering if the boss was dead. "Are you a fool?" Zhang Han felt both funny and annoying. He said, "You're awake, get up quickly." "Okay." Zhao Feng quickly sat up and shook his head. He began to look around the Mount New Moon. He saw familiar surroundings and little Hai, who had made him feel threatened. "Wait. Why was there a gorilla? Did Meng Meng fell asleep in the gorilla's arms? Zhao Feng was stunned and unconsciously asked, "Why is there a gorilla?" "It's the housekeeper here," Zhang Han answered calmly. "Oh." Zhao Feng sat on the ground and kept silent. A while later, he finally figured out what was going on. He stood up and asked, "Boss, was that you who saved me? Otherwise?" Zhao Feng was silent again, and his eyes were full of appreciation and the feeling of surviving a disaster. Suddenly, his eyes sank, and he looked at Zhang Han, kneeling slowly to the ground on both knees. He said, "Thank you for saving your life." Before he finished the word, Zhang Han's feet blocked his knee so that he could not kneel. "It's too early to kneel." Zhang Han raised a stern fairy spirit and said, "You respect me, I know, so I want to give you another chance." At this point, Zhang Han's eyes made Zhao Feng feel mysterious. "Would you like to be my disciple?" Zhang Han asked heavily. While Zhang Han spoke, he felt a little strange. When he was in the cultivation worlds, there were billions of cultivating men who wanted to be his disciple. But Zhang Han never accepted. Unexpectedly, just a month after his rebirth, he would like to take a disciple. He felt that it was tough to predict. After hearing this, although Zhao Feng didn't know what it meant to be a disciple of the boss, he knew it was his greatest chance. He did not hesitate to say, "I will." As he spoke, he felt that his knees fell down and finally knelt on the ground. He kowtowed 3 times to Zhang Han, and said slowly with his head down, "Disciple, Zhao Feng, is greeting master." "Get up," Zhang Han casually said, "call me the boss outside in the future." "Yes, master." "Oh no, boss." Zhao Feng nodded. After he got up, he asked with curiosity, "What sect are we, boss? Are we the same with the martial arts on TV?" Saying that, Zhao Feng lit up his eyes and said, "Boss, you must be the sect leader, right? With such a strong leader, our sect must have a high position." "Haha, I didn't expect that me, Zhao Feng, could be in the martial arts one day." "Thank you, master." "What are you talking about?" Zhang Han was speechless. "Ah?" Zhao Feng was a little stunned. "We are not a martial arts sect, nor people from martial arts." "Then, what is that?" Zhao Feng asked hesitantly. Zhao Feng, who suddenly came to the new world, with his eyes glazing over, knew nothing about it. But Zhang Han's next words stunned Zhao Feng. "We are looking at New Moon Bay," and Zhang Han said slowly, "Cultivators." "What, cultivator? Is there an immortal in the world?" Zhao Feng asked in surprise. "Come on, don't make a fuss, you'll know it later," Zhang Han said and patted Zhao Feng on the shoulder. "Oh." Zhao Feng nodded. Then he asked suddenly, "Boss, what's the name of our sect? If I meet another martial arts man one day, can they know our sect as I give a self-introduction?" "The name of the sect? I haven't thought about it yet. As for martial arts man, they are just a group of people who know little martial arts and naturally do not know what is immortal." Zhang Han answered. "Boss, then?" Zhao Feng asked again. But as soon as he spoke, Zhang Han interrupted him and said, "Stop, don't ask these questions. Since you're awake, it's time to get down to business." "What's the matter?" Zhao Feng asked and nodded. "For me." Zhang Han's eyes gradually cooled down, and he said word by word, "Kill Tang Zan."